The friends have escaped from the fortress of the Northmen. They've rescued Meg, but Fellman is in hot pursuit of them. Will our friends make it back to the kingdom, or will Fellman catch them? Let's read and see. Chapter 15, The Chase. Our friends flew from that fortress, and my, what a race! On the ground far below, mounted Northmen gave chase. From on high John looked down, and he sized up their foes. 'Twas a motley assortment, just as you'd suppose. Up in front was that slaver atop his black steed. 19 Northmen rode with him at frightening speed. But of greatest concern to John's far-seeing eyes was the clouder of cats of unusual size. Those, of course, were the battle cats, hissing with rage that the warlord had ordered released from their cage. Now our friends flew due south, the same way they had come. The thin air was quite cold, and their faces were numb. But alas, they were no longer flying so high, for the wind that had borne them had started to die. This was not welcome news. They all knew what it meant. Soon their flyers would slowly begin their descent. They flew 10 minutes more, and none touched down in a field. In a terrible instant, one look back revealed their pursuers had gained. They were 4 miles away. They could see gleaming steel in the broad light of day. Our friends left the 3 flyers and started to run, but not before something important was done. That dread bola of Fellman's still bound the dog's legs, and this led to their using the present of Meg's. See, she needed her knife, but that dagger was buried. It lay deep in the backpack the princess had carried. The girl dumped out its contents in search of her knife, and that's when she got the surprise of her life. In a scarf that was made of the finest of cotton was wrapped the girl's horn she'd completely forgotten. She now held up her gift from the elderly bear, and the horn gave them hope, and it drove back despair. The girl took a deep breath, and she gave it a blast. Could those bears even hear it in country this vast? Her friends covered their ears, and again the girl blew it. Then she knelt, and she picked up her dagger and drew it. The girl crawled to Sir Ray with the king's little blade. With a couple of cuts, nimble work she now made of the knotted up bola. The night was now free, but the Northmen had gained. Now our friends had to flee. So the 5 of them ran till they felt their lungs burn. Still their enemies gained. Would the tide ever turn? After running 2 miles, the girl sounded a blast, but the Northmen drew closer. Their mounts were so fast. Each look back would reveal they were hot on their heels. Those great cats ran the fastest. They'd missed a few meals. As their enemies neared, drawing in for the kill, our friends crossed a long plain that ran up a low hill. Then they slowed and they skidded and came to a halt. They had come to the edge of a natural fault that appeared on the ground of the northern frontier, not the kind they could climb. The descent was too sheer, and they couldn't rappel. It was 10,000 feet to the floor of that canyon. They'd just have to meet their pursuers in combat and fight to the death. The dog vowed he'd resist till he breathed his last breath. That bold knight said, "It looks like the end of the road, but to die in our beds isn't something we're owed. So make ready your weapons, our enemies near. Mark my words, they'll discover we sell our lives dear." Meg kept sounding her horn, which rang loud and rang clear. Sir Ray asked her to climb up that tree that was near. He suggested she blow it from high off the ground, so the clear northern air would help carry the sound. So she climbed up that pine. The pursuers drew nearer. The girl sounded her horn. Would those bears even hear her? Then Sir Ray said, "Prepare. We will give them a show. I'm ready for battle. My heart is aglow. I declare it's an honor, my brotherly band, to fight by your side and we'll make it our last stand. Meg kept sounding her horn from the top of the tree. Would anyone answer the princess's plea? She was starting to worry her eardrums would burst, but she blew and she blew, ever fearing the worst. And those blasts from that horn shook the tree to its roots. About 2 miles away, she could see that the brutes had slowed down, for they'd seen our friends caught in a trap, having come to the edge of the great northern gap. But Meg held the horn tight and continued to blow it. And somebody heard, though the girl didn't know it. Yes, indeed, to the east, in a network of caves, someone's sleep was disturbed by the inaudible waves. Those vibrations produced by that horn that was blown, rippled down through those roots in the underground stone. And they traveled for miles, tiny tremors of sound, to the darkest of dens that lay deep underground. Someone's dreams disappeared, and that somebody stirred, having felt what no other could have ever heard. Chapter 16, Fellman's Offer. From the hilltop, the comrades looked down on that plain. In a glance, these companions could all ascertain that these Northmen were near. They'd arrive all too soon. Our friends glanced at the sun. It was nearly high noon. Then the Northmen arrived, looking rugged and tall. They were armed to the teeth, and they looked ready to brawl. And their battle cat's fangs were a frightening sight. They were 5 inches long and an ivory white. When a cat arched its back with a horrible hiss, the boy took a step back toward that deadly abyss. They had foes to the front and a canyon behind. Our friends couldn't escape from this terrible bind. Now the slaver dismounted. As Fellman stepped forth, he snarled, "Give up the girl. She will not leave the north. She will not be escaping my clutches again. If you give her back freely, you'll save your own skin. But if you resist, we'll take her by force. Then you fellows will die, and we'll feel no remorse." All heads turned to Prince Martin, who gripped his bright blade. He considered this offer that Fellman had made. He could give up the princess and run to the king, who had come for the girl with an army he'd bring. Oh, but what if the army got slowed by delays? And would Meg even be there in 10 or 12 days? As he stared up at Fellman, the boy feared a fight. He wanted to run, but it didn't feel right. Martin looked up at Meg, who defiantly glared down at Fellman, although she was awfully scared. Then a memory flashed in the young prince's head of Sir Ray in a crisis and what Ray had said. In the depths of his chest, he now felt a warm glow. If you fought in a battle, it's one that you'll know. He adjusted his crown. He squinted his eyes. Now he icily said to the slaver's surprise, "I'm not going to give you this cousin of mine. Come and take her, you rascal, if you've got a spine." Fellman paused. Then he said in his nastiest voice, "Kid, I thought you were smarter. You've made the wrong choice." As they drew out their weapons, the Northlanders grinned. All was silent except for the howl of the wind. The men bristled with axes and sabers and maces. They thought, "This will be fun." You could tell by their faces. Those big cats licked their lips and looked ready to feast. Then they all heard a sound. It came from the east. It was rolling like thunder. It rumbled and boomed. The sound rattled the plain. Northmen whispered, "We're doomed." But the sound had a different effect on our friends, who'd been thinking they'd come to the deadliest of ends. This new feeling was later described by the boy as a mixture of terror, amazement, and joy. All eyes looked to the east, and our friend's spirit soared. Northmen quivered and quaked at the sight of the horde of 1,000-pound cave bears now rushing their way. They had heeded Meg's call. They would enter the fray. In those long ago days, bears could outrun a horse, and they'd heard the horn's call, and they raced to the source. With those bears surging in, all the Northlanders froze, and they shivered with fright from their heads to their toes. But then Fellman rebuked them. "You men better fight!" And now the battle began. The bears' fury burned bright. Here come the bears. This is going to be an epic battle. In this chapter, we got to see again how Prince Martin showed great courage in trying to save his friends. He had the opportunity to turn Meg over and get back safely to the kingdom, and he could have brought the king and his armies to fight the battle. But instead, he was concerned for Meg, so he stayed and he faced Fellman. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid. It was that his love and concern for Meg was greater than his fear. It wasn't that he had great weapons or anything like that. It was his love that held him there. How do you think that made Meg feel? To know that her friends were willing to lay down their lives for her sake. And it reminds me of when Jesus was in the garden on the night before he died. And there he's agonized and prayed to God, if there's another way to avoid this terrible thing that I'm going to face, the crucifixion. And he prayed and he said, but God, your will be done. Jesus loved God so much that he was willing to submit to his plans for his life, even though it meant great difficulty. And Jesus loved humanity so much. He loved you, he loved me so much that he made a way that we could be saved. And so when we think of how Meg felt when Prince Martin wasn't willing to turn his back on her, but wanted to, out of great love, stand up for her and save her, how much more is Jesus' love for you? How does that make you feel?